Hello everyone. So, back in November, I played through Super Mario Bros., the original game that was released in 1985, and after a lot of contemplating and consideration, and which was part of the reason why it was taking me a while to get back to making videos because I was just so indecisive about keeping those videos up. I still have them up even now as I'm recording this, but every time I thought about it, I just hated the commentary like more and more. Like every time I kept thinking about it, I just wanted to delete the videos because of how unsatisfied I was with the commentary. And somehow I just realized that I wasn't using my microphone. Anyway, I didn't feel very satisfied with the commentary because I really barely even talked about the game itself. And what little bit of the game that I did speak on, there was barely any reason for me to talk about the game at all at that point. So I decided, you know what, I want to do this video the justice that I think it deserves because Super Mario Bros. Is such an important and legendary game. Even though I did play through the game, there just wasn't enough room for me to say everything that I wanted to say about the game. That being said, where should I begin? I guess I should start off by talking about this game's natural evolution from previous games that Nintendo previously released, from Donkey Kong to Mario Brothers, from Mario Brothers to Super Mario Brothers. As I revisit these games, it seems the direction that Nintendo was going, especially with Mario, was becoming more and more obvious, as they had bigger plans for Mario beyond being Donkey Kong's rival. Donkey Kong's purpose was pretty much fulfilled as an antagonist of that era of Nintendo, from kidnapping human girlfriends to getting captured himself, only to turn into a complete crash out that disturbs insects. Mario wasn't even in Donkey Kong 3, as he had already starred in his own game with his brother Luigi, just several months prior. But Nintendo definitely had bigger plans beyond arcade games. They had the vision of making a fully fledged game, and that's where Super Mario Bros. Comes in. I think the natural evolution from Mario Bros. To Super Mario Bros. Is in the name itself. Because if you look back at Mario Brothers, the original game, the arcade game, it introduced quite a few concepts that would be expanded upon and refined even in this game, Super Mario Brothers. Perfect example of this is within the controls and how the game feels to play. Also, just to be clear, I want you guys to keep in mind that when I'm saying Mario Brothers, I'm referring to the 1983 game. And when I'm saying Super Mario Bros., I'm referring to the 1985 game. I think what I'll do to make this a little bit easier is I'll just say Mario Bros. 83. Anyway, in Mario Bros. 83, Mario starts off a little slow on the ground and then he picks up a little bit of speed. So I think this was at the point where Nintendo was starting to experiment with momentum in video games, because I think Ice Climber has something like that as well. Mario Bros. 83 was basically the pre-momentum based platformer, or at least that's what I'm calling it. But this game had one glaring issue, and that is within the jumping. Once you're in the air, you've got no mobility. You cannot move whatsoever until your feet are back on the ground. Now, DK and DK Jr. also had this, but the thing about those games is that those games were already simplistic in nature to where it didn't need complex control schemes or momentum-based physics to do so, because all the jumps were already precise anyway. Therefore, any jump that you made in those games were pretty much 100% the player's fault. But with Mario Bros. 83, which is a completely different game, we're dealing with much bigger jump heights than ever before, as Mario jumps high enough to reach one platform. But since you couldn't move in the air, you had to make every single jump count. If you miss a platform, you've got to fall back down and then try and make the jump again. If you try to jump underneath the platform and miss an enemy, you have to go back and try and hit it again, assuming that it hasn't fallen off the platform yet. What's this? You accidentally jump on top of an enemy because that's an ability that Mario does not have yet? You're dead. What's this? You accidentally jump on top of a fireball? You're dead. Oh no, I missed bonus coins in the bonus level. That was a waste of time. Now I won't be able to get the bonus. And the game just gets harder and harder. Difficult controls and difficult game design is a really bad combination. It was never a good combination. So, what about Super Mario Bros.? Well, they took what they learned from Mario Bros. And refined everything in terms of how Mario feels to control. For one thing, Mario now has the ability to run, with the simple pressing and holding of a button. Not only that, but Mario actually has proper aerial mobility, which means that now when you jump into the air, you can actually move. One of the really cool things that you can do is when you're walking or running on the ground, you can follow that up by jumping into the air, and then you'll jump even higher than your normal jump height, which gives you the ability to reach platforms or blocks that you couldn't reach before. Not only that, but you've actually got proper aerial mobility now, which means that if you end up overlapping your jump, you can actually retract it a little bit. Or if you end up running at top speed and then jumping and carrying your momentum in the air, you can actually break some of that momentum so that you won't overlap. Of course, aerial mobility is not nearly as good as ground mobility, but for what it was, the traction is actually pretty good. That being said, you've really got to be careful and confident when making a lot of jumps and overall decisions when playing the game. It can be very easy to mess up a jump, and then when you're trying to correct yourself, Mario feels extremely heavy. Next thing you know, you're crushing the buttons on your controller, and your palms are sweating, knees weak, arms are heavy, trying to make sure that Mario doesn't fall off the map. And then the situation becomes especially risky when you start running. As I mentioned earlier, the game gives the player the option to either walk through the level or run, but at the same time there are different situations where you're going to have to run in order to make certain jumps. By simply just walking through a level, you're not only playing it the safer way, but you're also objectively playing it the boring way. And I say that because a lot of the levels, just about every level in this game, is very short and probably doesn't take more than a minute to beat. Overall, it's really just not an optimal way of playing the game. In fact, I've looked up many of videos on YouTube of people playing through this game, and I've never seen players just walk through levels. Most people, including myself, always press and hold down the B button to run while they're playing the game. You just don't play the game by just walking. And considering that this game is an obstacle course or athletic-based platformer, just simply walking in this game is like walking while you're in an obstacle course in real life. Because that's essentially what Super Mario Bros. Is. The whole game is an obstacle course. And you don't walk in an obstacle course. That being said, I try to play through the entirety of the game without running. And it wasn't insufferable, it wasn't intolerable. I don't really have much an opinion about it, though I will say the game definitely took a bit longer to beat. It was a lot more difficult and also impossible to get to some of the higher routes, considering that running acts as a way of achieving a higher and longer jump. There were certain levels throughout the game that were impossible to complete without running at least once, or maybe even twice. There's one jump in World 4-3 where I struggled to get atop this mushroom top, and I couldn't even make it because of how high it was. So I needed to run so I could jump higher so I could reach the top. And if it wasn't jumping at higher heights that caused me problems, it was large gaps that were impossible to make while walking. such as in World 8-1 where there's a big gap near the end of the level that you have to make, but the only way you can make it is by running and jumping. The gap is close enough to where you will be able to reach the ledge, or at least the wall, but you will not make it to the platform itself, simply just by walking. Another jump that caused me issues was the infamous jump in World 8-2. If you know, you know that you have to run in order to make this jump. And the jump I'm referring to is none other than the two small narrow platforms that are right after the warp pipe near the end of the level, where you have to walk off the warp pipe, then land on the first platform, run off that platform, and then jump off the second one to make the next jump. It is simply impossible to make that jump just by walking, because walking just does not give you enough momentum to make that large gap. The jump that you have to make in 8-1 is essentially a predecessor to the jump that you have to make in 8-2. But anyway, now that I've played this game this way, I can see why nobody actually plays the game like that. Like, there's just no point in doing that. As I mentioned earlier, it definitely does bring to the table another way of playing the game instead of just rushing through the game like a lot of players do, including myself. The only people I could see playing the game this way is somebody who's never played a 2D Mario game before, or any video game for that matter. Or at the very least, just wants to get acquainted with the game and recognize and learn the level design. I could especially see that in one's first playthrough of a game. I do have to admit, as a kid growing up in the 2000s with the Game Boy Advance era and the Nintendo DS era, I think it took me quite some time to get acquainted with the run button. But once you do, it changes everything. This is, of course, not to say that running is everything, because there are definitely some points in the game where you are kind of required to slow down, even if it's just a little bit, to do some platforming or make sure that you don't get hit by an enemy. I think one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn with this game is to be patient and learn the game as I play it, because this was not my first 2D Mario game. As a matter of fact, by the time I finally got my hands on this game, I had already played Super Mario Bros. 2, 3, World. I played New Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo DS, and I'm pretty sure I've also played New Super Mario Bros. Wii before I finally got this game. It was honestly an underwhelming experience, and I remember it taking me years to beat it. For one thing, I probably still had a lot to learn and a lot of growing up to do, because I kept playing the game the same way and making the same mistakes. I was spoiled by the refined controls and physics of future Mario games, which can make this game hard to go back to, at least for some people, and yet somehow I still manage to come back to it even now. The controls are definitely outdated, especially when you consider future titles, but I think the controls in and of themselves are still worthy of being called a work of art, as Nintendo did with this game what they couldn't do with the original Mario Brothers. Anyway, I think I'm done talking about the controls, at least for right now. There are 4 areas in each world with a total of 8. There are also 5 different level themes, or types. First you have the grass or ground or plains theme, or some may just call it the overworld theme. This is the most common level type in the game, as most of your time will be spent on the ground. The first area of every world is a ground themed level, with some worlds having second areas that are also ground themed. The types of enemies that you'll come across in the ground theme are the little Goombas, which are little mushroom guys that used to be allies of the Mushroom Kingdom and decided to join with Bowser and his turtle army, consisting of the Koopa Troopas, the Koopa Paratroopas, Buzzy Beetles, Hammer Brothers, the Hammer Brothers, Lucky 2, which floats in a cloud and likes to throw spinies, and the Piranha Plants, which usually hang out in warp pipes. And I almost forgot about Bullet Bills, which are bullets that fly out of cannons. The second most common theme is the athletic theme, which consists of levels that take place in the sky.
These levels in particular are pretty platform heavy, and don't really give the player much room to run around in, as you're usually treading over a bottomless pit. Athletic themed levels usually take place in the third area of each world, except for World 8, because the third area in that game is just another ground level. Most athletic levels consist of Koopa Troopas and Koopa Paratroopas. There's a couple of athletic levels that are a little bit different, as you are running over bridges trying to dodge flying Cheep Cheeps, which are essentially the fish enemy in the game. Which leads me to the underwater levels, which there are only 2 of. Mario goes into an underwater pipe and he just swims through the level, where you have to swim past underwater vegetation, underwater vortexes that are disguised as bottomless pits, the Cheep Cheep, and a really annoying enemy called the bloopers. The funny thing about the underwater levels is that they are followed by the athletic levels that I just mentioned, which are the levels where you get chased by flying Cheep Cheeps. And the funny thing about these levels is that it's almost as if the Cheep Cheeps are angry at you for swimming in their territory and they want to get revenge on you. So they follow you from the previous level. Anyway, enough about the underwater levels, let's talk about the underground levels. Which, similar to the underwater levels, there are only 2 underground ones. I think the best way I could describe these levels is like this. Picture the ground levels, but underground, with more blocks, more warp pipes, more everything that becomes more of an obstacle. Overall, it's a much more cramped space than it would be just overground, which can make it a little bit more difficult to jump over enemies or jump on top of enemies, which is something that you can do in this game, unlike Mario Bros. 1983. These levels are also very well known for the warp skips, where you find a secret area in the level where you come across a warp pipe that can take you to the next world, the world after that, or the world after that. In World 1-2, you can skip right to World 4 if you wanted to. Which, now that I think about it, is a pretty good way to skip through levels that you've already played, so that you can try and hurry up and get back to where you were before, after getting a game over and having to start the game from the beginning. And finally, there's the castle levels, which take place at the end of each world, which is the 4th area of the world. These levels are like tests. These levels are the game's way of seeing what you know and what you've learned from previous levels. They also insert obstacles that aren't normally in the other levels, like the Podoboos, which are fireballs that like to fly out of lakes of fire and try and attack you after you jump. Fire sticks, which try and catch you while you're jumping as well, which could also get in the way if you're trying to collect items, which I still need to get into. Cryptic puzzles that you need to uncover, and dodging Bowser's fire breath as he tries to hit you on your way to him. And once you finally face off with him, you have to dodge him. You either have to jump over him or run underneath him to grab the axe that destroys the bridge, knocking him off the bridge and into the lava. Each world having its own variation of this very same boss fight. There could be blocks getting in the way at the top to where you would have to run over, where you have to run underneath Bowser after he jumps. Or maybe there's a platform that will help you run past Bowser and jump over him. As you get closer and closer to the end of the game, he gains hammers and throws them at you. And he throws a ridiculous amount of hammers, even more hammers than the Hammer Brothers. Bowser's low-key like a leader of a gang. Always ends up having more firepower than his own men. All of that said, let's talk about the collectibles for a second. The coins are the primary collectibles. You're going to be finding those all over levels. Collect 100, you get an extra life. I remember when I was a kid, you could not tell me not to collect coins. I was always collecting coins, always trying to rack up the 1-ups, which is ironic because I was losing them a lot more the further I got into this game. You'll also find them in question mark blocks and regular blocks. Eventually you'll come across a multi-coin block. Once you hit a multi-coin block, there's a timer that goes down, and you have to try and hit the block as many times as possible to get the most amount of coins that you can. I think the most I've managed to get is about 12 or maybe 13. I'm not really sure. Getting back to the question mark blocks, these are the blocks where you will normally find items. Items like the super mushroom, the fire flower, the starman, and a one-up mushroom. I think this is one of the first games that introduced a sort of health system. In a lot of games at the time, when you take one hit, you're dead. The super mushroom acts as a way of giving the player an extra hit point. Not only that, but it also gives you the ability to break bricks, which is not something that you can just do as Mario. The fire flower transforms Super Mario into Fire Mario, and it gives Mario the ability to shoot fireballs, which is great for getting rid of enemies without having to jump on top of them. As a matter of fact, if you get to Bowser as Fire Mario, you can shoot fireballs at Bowser and defeat him without even having to get close to him. Unfortunately, if you do take a hit as Fire Mario, you go back to Mario. You don't just go back to Super Mario, you go back to Mario. And there is one level in particular that I'm thinking of that always killed my runs whenever I played this game as a kid, where I found even Fire Mario unavailing. Which, by the way, the Buzzy Beetles have shells that are invulnerable to fire. But I'm not talking about the Buzzy Beetle. The level I am talking about is World 5-2, which has the most infamous placement of a Hammer Brother I have ever seen in a Mario game. Why did they put this Hammer Brother right here on these blocks? It's not like you can just run underneath the Hammer Brother, because the blocks are shaped like stairs. If you try to jump over it, you have to watch out for hammers, or if it's going to jump in your face. If you try to attack it, it's probably going to pull out a hammer before you can actually jump on top of it. Otherwise, you're going to jump on top of the hammer. It moves back and forth. It jumps every few seconds. And I have still yet to figure out his hammer throwing pattern. I can't tell if it's randomized or sequential. Saying all of this to say, it's almost impossible to hit this thing with a fireball, because you kind of have to get pretty close to it in order to hit it. The chances of getting hit are way bigger than not getting hit at all. Either way, this Hammer Brother needs to be studied, and so do the designers' brain chemistry, because I just don't understand why they did this. It was always this Hammer Brother that killed my runs. I lost so many lives to this guy. He's not even the last Hammer Brother in the level. Why did they put that right there? Anyway, getting back to the items, the one-up mushroom is in the name itself. It's a mushroom that grants you a one-up. These items are usually pretty well hidden in levels. As much as I've played this game, I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of secret one-up mushrooms that I don't know about, simply because I just haven't taken out the time to look for them. And lastly, the Starmen. These turn Mario invincible for a short period of time, allowing you to plow through a whole bunch of enemies. You'll usually find these in the ground levels. I don't see them being very useful in the athletic ones. But once you get one of these, you can plow through probably more than half a level. The only issue is, if anybody really cares, is that once you get a Starman and go through a whole bunch of enemies, you don't rack up any combo points. And combo points are normally achieved by hitting more than one enemy before landing on the ground. Bounce on one enemy and then bounce on another enemy, and it doubles the points, and then triples and then quadruples until you eventually get a 1-up. This can also be achieved by kicking a Koopa Troopa shell into a trail of enemies. There's not a lot of instances in the game where that can actually happen. In most normal instances, you're not going to be bouncing on top of enemies very often, especially considering how Mario bounces off of enemies in this game. Instead of acting as an extra jump, it more so acts as a fall buffer, if that makes sense. The only real way you're going to be able to bounce off of enemies consecutively is if you use the infinite 1-up trick at the end of World 3-1, which has a couple of Koopas at the staircase. And it's surprisingly not too difficult. In fact, I managed to pull it off one time back in 2023 when I went live, albeit after a few tries. It's simply a matter of positioning Mario and the Koopa shell. That being said, I don't think a lot of people nowadays really take out the time to do a trick like this. They would rather just use save states. When I played through the game live, I tried not to use save states or rewind features. And it took me much longer to beat the game, and I thought I was going to get a game over eventually. And I'm pretty sure I would have gotten a game over at some point if I didn't do the infinite 1-up trick during my stream, because I lost an unbelievable amount of lives. I wasn't kidding when I said I couldn't beat this game when I was younger. Even the Super Mario All-Stars version kind of gave me some trouble because the game is pretty much exactly the same, almost, as the original NES version, but it just has new graphics and a new save feature. The difficulty really does not change, and neither do the controls or physics. There is one very noticeable difference that I've noticed between both versions, and it's the way that Mario breaks blocks. In the original game, you hit a block, you fall right back down, for the most part, but there are instances where I've noticed where Mario will break the block, but he'll kind of like air buffer a little bit and then he'll fall back down. But in Super Mario All-Stars, Mario hits a block and then he not frame buffers, but he buffers in the air and then he falls down. I'm not really sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but if you look at the gameplay, you can see there's a small difference in how Mario breaks blocks in this game. It's not a detail that people are going to pay attention to, but it's definitely something I've noticed over the years. Overall, the All-Stars version is very faithful to the original, and both versions are still worthy of being played. It's great to see that Nintendo has both the original NES versions of all the Mario games available to play, as well as their respective Super Mario All-Stars versions. It's a good way of displaying that both remakes and original versions of games can coexist. But that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to turn this video into a video about video game preservation, because that's a topic that probably deserves its own video. Anyway, overall, this game is still very fun to play. It's been said before, but this game's controls are very primitive, but it's a step in the right direction for what Nintendo was doing with Mario. I really haven't said much about the level design because I don't think there's really much to say about it. Because the best way I could describe the game's level design is as every level is an obstacle course, which is something that I've said somewhere in the beginning of the video. I already mentioned that there was a lot of reused assets when I was talking about the different level themes in the game, and truth be told, that's very typical Super Mario level design, because you could put Mario in pretty much the same places and just reshape what the level looks like. And that's exactly what they did, because even though they used the same level types, which are very few in this game, they worked around those few level types to try and make every level look as unique as possible. Well, maybe not unique, but certainly creative nonetheless. But then you do have some levels that are actually seen again later on in the game. First you get easier versions of levels, and then sometime later on you'll get harder versions of certain levels. For example, World 7-3 is actually a harder version of World 2-3. And that's not even the only level. I think there's a good 5 recycle levels in this game, which isn't something that bothers me personally, but I think this might bother a few people. I'm not really sure. It depends on who you ask. But I think I understand both sides. For one thing, I understand the developer side because, 32 levels, it can be a little bit difficult to create that many levels for a game. While at the same time I see the player side, because I can see recycled levels being an issue to some people. But personally, this just doesn't bother me, but that doesn't mean it doesn't go unnoticed. One more thing I want to mention really quick is that the game has a challenge mode, or a hard mode if you will. It's kind of hard to really just call it a hard mode, but it is a little bit more difficult. So after finishing the game once, you can replay the game, but on a higher difficulty. In the original game, Princess Peach, or Princess Toadstool, introduces you or presents you with a new quest. I did a little bit of research while recording this, and it is called hard mode, which is the new quest in question. And it doesn't really have many differences, but one of the biggest differences I've noticed is that all the little Goombas are replaced with buzzy beetles, which does give you less opportunities to use Fire Mario. All enemies move faster except for piranha plants. Elevator style lifts are made shorter, which is something I didn't really notice. Hammer Brothers wait a shorter amount of time before walking towards the player. And finally, Worlds 1-3, 1-4, 2-2, 2-3, and 2-4 are exact clones of their harder counterparts, which are Worlds 5-3, 6-4, 7-2, 7-3, and 5-4 respectively. The recycled levels that I mentioned a little while ago. Hard mode in Super Mario All-Stars is referred to as the Star Courses. But anyway, the difficulty wasn't very noticeable. You have to pay really close attention to notice how much more difficult the game is in hard mode, which is really not much. In fact, when I tried to do the no running challenge while playing this game on Super Mario All-Stars, I was playing the star mode, or the hard mode, and the game wasn't much harder at all. Anybody could play this game casually and not notice the game being more difficult. As I mentioned before, the only two differences that I've noticed for the most part, or at least the two most noticeable things about hard mode, is that the little Goombas are replaced by the buzzy beetles, and all the enemies move faster than they normally did. But if you ask me, the most difficult part about this game is the controls. I don't really want this to happen. I'd rather Nintendo just make another 2D Mario game, but let's just say that if Nintendo decided to remake this game and completely just remake all the levels, and the level design is exactly the same, but Mario's controls are much better, to the point where the controls and the physics are on par with modern 2D Mario, I guarantee the game would be so much easier. But yeah, like I said, I don't want a remake of this game. Super Mario Maker and Super Mario Maker 2 are the closest to remakes of those games that we're ever going to get. I mean, you can just remake all of the levels from the original game in Super Mario Maker. And I'm pretty sure somebody has done that. I'd be more surprised if there aren't any remade levels that don't exist than if they do exist. Like, imagine booting up Super Mario Maker 2 and nobody has remade those classic levels. Like, you're telling me that not even one person has thought to do that? But I don't know, I haven't played Super Mario Maker in quite some time. That's something I need to change. Also, I just wanted to point out that remake levels do exist. I just looked it up, and I just remembered that I have witnessed levels being remade on Super Mario Maker before. Okay, wow, this video's gone on to be quite long. I've had a lot to say, didn't I? So I don't really have much to say for this outro. I think I've said everything I need to say about this game. I didn't get to say nearly enough about this game when I played through it back in November of last year. And with this video, I was able to do that, and probably then some. I mean, just look at how long it is. I really enjoyed making this video and talking about this game, and I'm definitely going to be doing it again in the future. But that's all I have to say. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. I appreciate that. Anyway, see you guys in the next video, and have a blessed one.